Sorry, I've got a kitten that's running around, and we just fostered one that followed me home this week. So,
Lucas, that's going to be the beginning of our recording. So way to keep it fun and
okay, awesome.
All right. So we're back again for another weekly discussion over the text. And this week, it was over math strategies and techniques. So I have Zane with me, Lucas with me, and myself, Gianna. So we're just going to talk about the chapter in the same format that we have, which is just going over the learning objectives. So I am actually a math special ed teacher, a math teacher, so I'm excited to talk about this. And I think, Zane, you said math is your favorite too, right?
Yeah, that's one of the main ones that I teach, especially in the morning. We have a 2-hour math block for my 7th and 8th graders. So yeah.
And Lucas, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Lucas, do you love math or what?
I sit in a lot of math classes. I'm primarily in math classes, and then I work in algebra lab, which is basically just a additional guided instruction. So yeah.
Cool. Well, I love math. I used to hate it. I never thought I'd like teaching it, but this is my first year teaching math, and it's so much fun. So anywho, the objectives are, it just talks about like the basic concepts and skills that are foundational to mathematics, how they can be taught to students with high incidence disabilities, the challenges that problem solving and advanced levels of mathematics can pose for students with high incidence disabilities, and then essential features of an effective mathematics curricula for students with HI. So the first objective just talks about developing a foundation in mathematics and just how it could be really difficult for students with high incidence disabilities to develop that foundation. Just a lot of it says that, it talks about you need to have mathematical literacy and computation skills. And those are definitely things that I see my students struggle with big time. I don't know, Zane, if you wanted to add anything before we dive deep into it, maybe some areas that you see kids struggle with the most in math.
I mean, I have kids that struggle with like what operation to use.
Yeah.
Like, is it addition, subtraction, multiplication, division? How do you even put it in my calculator correctly?
Yes.
How to put in a positive or a negative number? How to use the exponent button? It's just wild. We're going over order of operations right now, and my LEM is going to be on solving one-step equations.
Oh, cool.
So that's fun, and for me at least, and they start to like it a lot once they really understand how it goes. It's just like getting there and then watching them make these like silly small mistakes. It's just, but it's cool once they get that light bulb. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree. That's something I see them struggle with a lot is like, what operation do I use? I actually have, so right now in my 8th grade math, it's pre-algebra, and they're doing like solving for the variable, solving for X. And I always am telling them like, do the opposite. That's how we do it. And like, they don't even know what the opposite of multiplication is. Sometimes they'll say subtraction, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's like a very basic skill. So yeah, just those like foundational skills in math and like number sense. That's something the text mentions that I do see a lot of my kids struggle with. And then also computation. So just like going forward, I like give most of my kids, and I don't know, this might be an issue, but I give most of my kids a calculator accommodation on their IEP.
Oh yeah.
Like almost all of them, because if you're in 7th or 8th grade and just really struggling with the foundational skills, like you really need that for computation, and otherwise they'll never get ahead, I think, or make any gains. So that's something I do for like almost all of my kids. So let's see, what else can it talk about? It talks about how one-to-one correspondence is one of the very first math concepts students should learn, because it means recognizing that units have numerical values. And then it also just talks about different areas of mathematics standards and what involves teaching them. Also, it talks about vocabulary for math. That's something that like students really struggle with. And then it discusses briefly place value. So place value is another thing that I've like really see my kids struggle with. Some of them don't even know. Oh, like if I say round to the hundredths place, they're like, "What's that?" Um, and every day it's me labeling the place values, and then they get it, of course, but it's just something that isn't like sticking with them.
I have some like lower learners that don't even, we're going over like some more like life skill type things, like how to do a transaction at a restaurant, you know, how many quarters are in a dollar, how do you pay for something at the store. um, there's still kids that don't understand that there's 100 cents in $1.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I was trying to. What
Like,
was I
oh,
doing?
how many, so like 4 quarters, that's what, 100 cents, which is, and then they look at me like I'm crazy. It
Yeah.
100 cents is $1, man. What do you think? When something's 2.99, what do you think happens when we get to 100? It's not 100. It's $3. It's rough. It's sad.
Yeah, no, I see the same thing. And you know what's like hard for me too is because this is my first year, like we've talked about a million times, but teaching middle school and also really teaching math. So I feel like I have nothing to compare it to. And I just like so much of me wonders like how much is this like is it a learning gap from like the pandemic or is it you know what I mean? Like it's every day I literally sit here with at this desk with my like head in my hands and I'm like what is it, you know? Like is it that they never really learned the concepts and had the, you know, had that practice that they needed the past 2 years? Because this district was entirely virtual pretty much for all last year. And then you know, the year before obviously it was that last half of the year. So anyway, it's always for me like, is it the learning disability or did they just never really learn this? So I hear you. It's rough, rough, rough. Um, let's see. The next part of the chapter just talks about like more basic skills like counting, counting backwards, counting down, and computation. So we kind of touched on this already, but the computation is something that I really see my kids struggle with. And also, right now, we're doing like order of operations. So, what order to do the computation in is something
Mhm.
that they really struggle with. Even with having like the PEMDAS acronym in front of them at all times, they still kind of struggle with it. So, that is a rough area as well. And then the vocabulary of computation. So that's another thing too with word problems. Like find the sum of. They'll be like, "What's the sum?"
Yeah,
You
right.
know, or what is the product of? What's the product? We had a test in eighth grade doing that using those like kind of vocabulary words like taking an expression that would be like six more than n so they would have to write n plus six but when it got to some of those like words like product or sum, they really struggled. So I see that for sure. Then it talks about addition, subtraction, and just ways to teach this. A lot of this, like, is more so I think that you would use it at an elementary level, but of course, it's like good even with older kids because obviously they will need to remediate those skills as we're talking about seeing them struggling with. Um, Using manipulatives. I don't know, is there anything that you guys have found to like be really successful in like teaching some of these operations and like the use of manipulatives or I don't know, things like that. I really I like my students benefit from like multiplication charts and hundreds charts, but
Yeah, I have a multiplication chart posted in my room, and the big thing that I've been doing lately is like trying to, like, especially when dealing with positive and negative numbers, they have a really hard time like
yes.
figuring out like how that works out or whatever. So I try to like say, you know, oh, you're already second place in line, and now you got to go back 6 places. So let's go back. So how far back in line are you going to be now? So when I like put it in perspective like that for them into like a real world thing, they're like, oh, I can picture it. I can see it now. Great. That's -8, something
Yeah.
like that. They really responded well to that. And then
Oh
just
my
showing them how to
goodness.
actually put it in their calculator. We have like a student learning objective we have to do for school every year that's tied to our like teacher rating and then our bonus or whatever. And this year I'm doing mine on calculator usage for my students. So I have to take baseline data on, telling them, show me how you clear your calculator. Show me how you multiply 6 times 8. Show me how to do the, 6 squared, things
Yeah.
like that. And then do some training with them throughout the year and then take final data at the end of the year to see if they've improved on how they use their calculator.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's something like I see my students struggle with too. And then it's like, even if they have that calculator accommodation, can they use it? So that's something I've been trying to focus on with them as well. On that note, I wanted to talk about something with positive and negative integers because my kids really struggle with that too. And something like from our curriculum, we use CPM math. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's a really tough curriculum, but it does a lot of like really cool things that I do appreciate. But one thing that they do is like they use positive and negative signs like this. So like if I have 5 positives and I add 6 negatives, and then like you cancel them and
Sure.
then you're left with like 1 negative, and then you're like, oh, that's why it's -1, so it's just an idea to like put in your toolbox because that really helps my students visualize it. And you could even do it with multiplication and stuff too, like groups of negatives, things of that nature.
I've noticed with my freshmen, especially, subtracting and adding to negatives has been extremely difficult. Also, basic computations like even dividing an even number by 2. Okay. Sorry,
Oh
my
my gosh,
cat's
I love your cat.
And really, it's only been with my freshmen though that struggle with those basic computations. But I do something similar to what Zane does. I have a student, so if it's like -20 minus 8, she cannot move past that. I'm like, okay, I took $20 from you and I took 8 more. Like, how many dollars did I take from you? And then that like clicks in her brain. But for some reason, there's a huge disconnect with my freshmen in terms of that.
Yeah, I found that using money for integers is really helpful too. Like one of my students couldn't understand why when you take away a negative, it gets bigger. So like my example was if I got a fee on in my bank account, like they took away $12, then I'd have $12 less. But if they took away that fee, now I'd have $12 more, like they're taking away the negative. So yeah, money is really good to help students conceptualize positive and negative integers. Cool. The next part of the chapter talks about skills that build upon numeracy and calculation. And it says, among the concepts and skills requiring facility at calculation are fractions and decimals using money and measurement, including time. They use these skills frequently and may not recognize them as mathematics, but number sense is needed to comprehend. So that goes back to like kind of what we were just talking about, that the students who are struggling with the things that we're seeing are really struggling at their core with like their number sense and their computation. Fractions. That's actually, most of my kiddos do really well with fractions, honestly. The one thing that could be difficult for them is adding mixed numbers. So like if I add a mixed number and I'm trying to, I don't even know how I would say that. If the fraction adds up to equal like another whole number, they struggle with like conceptualizing that. And equivalent fractions, they're good with. Something that's hard for them is like determining the difference of like multiplying fractions versus adding fractions, because multiplication you just go straight across, whereas when you add they have to have a common denominator.
Sure.
My kiddos don't know how to grasp that, and I don't either, to be honest with you. Like I don't know what to tell them why that is, because they just always get it confused. And like obviously you could tell them a million times multiplication, we don't need a common denominator. Adding we do, and for some of them it's just not really sticking. So
yeah, that comes into play, like the whole calculator thing. Like show them how to use the calculator. I show them how to do all that, but I know it's really important still for them to know how to actually do it the long way.
Yeah.
I have some kids that are like crazy when it comes to one-step equations or doing, order of operations. They can sit there and like figure it all out in their head, and then he just gives me the answer, and I'm like, well, how'd you get there? And then he can tell me, but he's not showing any of his work, even though I'm showing it all on the board. I'm like, I need you to write it like this. It needs to look like an upside down pyramid going
Yeah.
to the answer. And it's just like, but yeah, the fraction thing, my kids did pretty well with that, especially the cross multiplying. And then I was doing like three-way proportions where they would go across, and there would be like three different fractions, and you'd have to solve the one proportion to get to the next one. So that's kind of similar to the fraction situation, but they seemed to have fun with that once they figured it out.
Yeah. Very cool. The next part talks about decimals, and it says that decimals may make more intuitive sense to students than do fractions. I disagree. I feel like my kids do better with fractions than with decimals. And it says here the appreciation of place value is critical to comprehending decimals. So that would be probably why my students do worse with decimals, because I don't think they have that firm understanding of place values.
Nope. Mine don't either.
Yeah. The other part just talks about estimating. That's something I think my kids are okay with. I don't really see them struggle with that too much. Rounding up and rounding down, we just did the other day, and they did okay. So that was good, because I know that could be difficult. Like last year when I was in elementary, I had to teach that to like second graders, and for students who struggle with number sense, that could be so frustrating to teach. Like just, you're repeating it and repeating it and repeating it, but something just like isn't clicking. So yeah, then it just discussed the big ideas that anchor math instruction, and that's place value, the associative property, rate of composition or decomposition, expanded notation, distributive property, equivalence, and commutative property. It says these just make up the major foundational mathematical operations meaningful. So that makes sense. The other thing is problem solving. So this kind of goes to Zane, what you said, and I feel like that's something I see every day as my students with word problems, like struggling with the problem solving aspect of it, and being able to look at something and determine like what operation they're supposed to be using. I don't know if Lucas, if you wanted to add anything.
I don't think so. I don't have too much to add to that.
Okay. I'm just like reading over this really quickly. Yeah, and it just says students with math-related disabilities often have difficulty with problem-solving tasks. And
well, like I guess reading through it, like you mentioned with word problems, the sum of, the product of.
Oh yeah, word problems are super rough with my kids. Like even the ones that throw in like the extra information that's like trying to trick them. Like Sally has 20 peaches and 25 pears. She picked some more peaches this morning for her stand, and now she has 100 peaches. How many peaches did she pick? Well, why do you even have to put in the stuff in there about the pears? You're just trying to confuse them. For a kid with a disability, that they're like, well, what about the pears? What are those?
yeah.
Stuff like that. They're just really hung up on that and confused. And then it's like figuring out what operation are you supposed to use in that. I was literally going over a worksheet with a student today about that, and I was just like, what do you like? It's frustrating to me because it's so easy for me to conceptualize it, but for them it's like, man, it must be so hard.
I'm somewhat the opposite. I love math when it comes to the numbers, but the minute you throw a word problem at me, even I have to sit down and pick out the little pieces and then throw them all down and list them. Like I honestly can't stand. I know the word problems have real world application, but I think, like you said, it kind of works to confuse the typical student, especially the student with a disability.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I hated them. It's definitely like as I've gotten older that I've come to appreciate math. Like I was one of those people that always said I wasn't a math person. It's funny now I have like a sign on my board that says how to be a math person. Step 1, do math. Step 2, be a person. But like when I was a kid, I was very much like I would shy away from word problems as well. So I definitely empathize with my kids. But I'm right there with saying like to me it's a lot easier and I love it. To me, math was like a puzzle. But something we could dive into really quickly, and it's a good part of the text I think is that it talks about for many students with HI, just attending to the details and organizing the necessary information is overwhelming. And it talks about 4 reasons that students could really struggle, which I think is something we should really keep in mind as teachers, and that it could be the motivation, mathematical and other literacy skills, confounded word problems, and complex math tasks. So I figured since we're kind of going fast, maybe we could talk about this really quickly. But the first thing is that it talks about motivation and why that could be an issue. And that's because students just don't think that math is important. And, I hear kids say it every day. It's like, why do I have to do this? Like, why it doesn't matter to my life. And maybe that's part of the reason why I've come to love math is because math, when I was learning it, I felt like it was irrelevant, but it is relevant and we do use it, like every day. We just may not realize it. So that's definitely something I see is the motivation. And the other is like the literacy component of math. That's something that we talked about too, like students who struggle with decoding. Obviously, a word problem is going to be difficult for them, and it's going to add that extra layer of difficulty to that. And what was the other part? It said complex math task. So, figuring out what's important in the problem. That's something that students struggle with. So just wanted to touch on that really quickly. I don't know if you guys wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I think that they're, maybe not as excited about math because sometimes they do struggle to grasp what exactly they're supposed to be doing. And there are so many things in math that build on each other. And if you have like splinter skills and you don't really know, 2 of the 5 steps on how to, solve an inequality or something like that, it's going to be really, really hard for you. And it's going to be tough when you get part of it, but you don't get the other part, or you can get all the way to this certain part, but because you don't know how to do this one step, it's going to give you the whole wrong answer. Things like that. I can see how, and like you said too, like, when am I going to have to use this in my life? Well, the old saying that's funny now. I've seen a meme out there, teachers that would say when we were in school, you're not always going to have a calculator in your pocket, but yeah, we literally do have a calculator in our pocket.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And that was part of the reason I hated math too, was the computation. Like I was never good with my math facts. And it's funny now that I'm older, like I could just look at a student's problem and I know the answer. But when I was in their spot, literally in this building in middle school, I hated it because I couldn't remember, but I didn't have an IEP, so I didn't have access to a calculator. And I feel like I learned math from using a calculator. And like you said, now I have it in my back pocket, so it just makes it a lot easier. So yeah, I hear you, definitely. So I'm trying to skip to the next. This is a strategy for improving problem solving that I could talk about really quickly. It says, discover the sign, read the problem, answer or draw and check, and then write the answer. So that's something my kiddos do really well when I have them draw pictures for word problems. So that's something, that is a strategy that I've seen really be beneficial. General approaches to math instruction, peer assisted learning strategies, direct instruction. This would be a good kind of topic. What do you guys feel like is a more effective math instruction? Like the gradual release of responsibility, like, more of that direct instruction, or like learning by discovery? Like where I feel like math used to be very like guided instruction, but I'm using a curriculum now that is more like learning by discovery and like the more along with the PALS, like the peer assisted learning, and it encourages productive struggle with math. In your like, what curriculum does your school use? What do you feel like is the most effective way to teach math?
I still teach it the explicit instruction, direct instruction way. Like, I feel like your term productive struggle is an oxymoron.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as a productive struggle, I suppose. I guess maybe I could see how there could be, but God, if somebody just gave me a math problem and said, "I want you to just play around with it and see if you can figure out the answer," that's got to be way more frustrating than having someone just show you how to do it. I like to go over a whole worksheet together as a group. Then I'll identify which students are struggling and need to go break off into a small group and get more guided practice. And then the students that are really getting it, then I'll say, "Okay, why don't you tell me how you got there?" "Oh, okay." Or they'll make the mistake and I'll say, "Oh, well, how did you get there?" And then they'll find their mistake in that. And then I'll kind of say, "Okay, maybe you do the next problem on your own," and then we'll review it. Then once they get that right, kind of the graduated release of responsibility, like you said. And I find that works best. And especially with my kids, if I just said, "Hey, here's some math problems. Why don't you play around with it and see if you can figure it out?" they would freak out.
Yeah. I could definitely see like with emotional disability kids, why maybe that wouldn't be the best. So I used to when I first came to this district and we started using this curriculum, I did not like it because I felt like it was like at first the productive struggle thing, like you said, I didn't feel like it was productive and I felt like the kids weren't learning. But now that we've been using it for a few months, I love it. Like it's actually it's really great. It's called, like I said, it's called CPM. And what it does is, well, I don't know if you guys saw on the LEM, but there's those different lesson types. And there's the 5E model, which is like you get the students engaged and then like you come back and then you, I have it somewhere. I don't know. I did my LEM off of this. So you would think that, that I would know what it was. But
it's like the
anyway,
Gallagher 5E
that's
engagement.
Engagement, elaboration. So the curriculum actually follows that, where like the students, it's called a core problem, and it's one of those productive struggle problems that you said. I know, Zaina, that you're kind of turned off to, but it was like it was like finding patterns in something, and they had to they would get these blocks, and then they would have to find the patterns, and then like the lesson ended up being about I think I don't even remember what it was, to be honest with you, because this was one of our first ones. But anyway, they got to collaborate like in their teams, and they actually got to really learn it. A better example was we did when we started doing algebra tiles, where they would like use these tiles in a group, and then like they really learned that way. And I felt like we're way more involved with it versus just like the standard teaching of math, because it really helps them understand math and not just do math to do math, like why does it work that way? Or they had like positive and negative tile boards. So that's 8th grade math. And then 7th grade math uses the same curriculum, but they do it more the standard way. And the students definitely like don't understand it. Granted, it's like a curriculum that's not meant to be taught the traditional way, but I can see the positives and negatives to both. I think certain students need that repeated practice, like you were saying. But in talking about motivation and like seeing the value in math, I sometimes think that the more like abstract way of teaching it, like the hands-off way of teaching it, can be a little bit more beneficial.
Yeah, we got those algebra tiles. I actually just did. Our school district has mandated professional learning every Tuesday and Thursday in the morning for an hour. And I've been doing some math training with something called Gizmos. Have you heard of it?
Mm-mm.
So it's a part of the curriculum of Gizmos is using those algebra tiles that you were talking about.
Oh, cool. So it's
kind of
in CPM
just,
too. Hold on. Because I'm in my classroom and I have like the CPM book. I want to see if I could just like pull up one of the core problems because I want to show you what I mean by the productive struggle I was talking about. Hold on. Because we've got a little time. We're almost through the chapter. So let me pull this up really quickly. But yeah, I like algebra tiles a lot. I felt like they really helped especially the kids like with IEPs, because the use of manipulatives can be super helpful. So I'm a fan of them. Have you liked them when you've used them so far?
I just got training on them like last week and earlier this week. So I haven't really implemented them, but it's been interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah, they're one of those things that can be tricky at first, but that's what actually made me start liking the curriculum that we have, because I hated CPM at first. I was like, this is so stupid. My kids are so confused. They don't know what the point of the learning is. Hold on, I'm trying to see if I could pull something up really quickly. Core problems. And then, like I said too, the curriculum, it does kind of do for that elaboration part. I don't know if you guys could see, but then you can't really see. No, that's my work computer. Whatever. You do give the kids a notebook in their toolkit, so they get to use that to reference. So it's not completely just letting them try and figure it out on their own, but there definitely is a portion of that. But you put things, we call it their toolkit, to help them better understand it. So while I'm trying to pull that up, we're almost done. This was the second objective, which was problem solving in advanced mathematics. So we kind of already went through this. And the last portion of the chapter just talks about the curriculum. So we kind of are already touching on that. But it says traditional mathematics curricula are at least partly responsible for, the math difficulties that students with high incidence disabilities, because the standard that they face, because the standards in the curricula, as they progress, the gaps keep widening. And it says the primary source of curricula has long been textbooks, and that newer textbooks are increasingly influenced by the NCTM and CCSS math standards. However, rigidly progressing through a textbook may not suffice for a comprehensive curriculum, especially in the students with HI. And it says, the standard curriculum is more focused on rote learning of computation skills and tend to have low quality instructional features. So I feel like that is probably why my district picked the curriculum that they did.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm still trying to pull that up. I don't know if there's anything what you guys want to discuss while I'm doing this, so you're not just waiting on me.
No, I can see why. I mean, what kind of school district are you in?
It's Crown Point School District.
Okay.
They pride themselves on being super ultra competitive and holding themselves to a high standard.
Sure.
But that being said, so they just started implementing CPM, I think a couple of years ago. And a huge issue is that teachers are kind of taking the curriculum and interpreting it in their own way. Whereas, like I said, the 8th grade teachers who I support are sticking and doing it with fidelity. And like I said, I hated it, but now I love it. But other teachers aren't. So I feel like the students aren't grasping it. It's a review and preview model of instruction. So it's not just repeated practice, but it's a constant spiraling of skills, which is good. I think it could be beneficial for some students. So if you're not doing it the right way, the review and preview doesn't really make sense. So it's not really being implemented correctly. And our test scores have significantly dropped in math since implementing CPM. But that being said, I think if it's used the right way, it could be beneficial.
Yeah, we're at a super underperforming public school in South Bend.
Yeah.
Like it's like F grades and has, a bunch of lower socioeconomic status families and stuff like that. And I I think they're just really focused on like getting kids' behavior under control in the school. I get comments often from other gen ed teachers saying like, "Oh, your kids are great. They behave better than the kids that aren't in your classroom," which mine's a self-contained, like super emotional,
Yeah.
disability struggles with behavior kind of classroom. And so, I mean, I feel like no matter what curriculum you put in at this point, if you can't get the kids to sit and behave, then they can't learn anything.
Yeah, definitely.
So I feel like that's why they haven't updated any of our curriculum, but they kind of put it all on the teachers to do, like, use like lots of like UDL type stuff and different like Edpuzzle and Clever and all these different virtual type tools to like engage students in quizzes and things like that, and Kahoot, which
Oh,
is
wow.
it's all like individually based on the teacher. Like they have a book, but then there's also kind of like what can you do as a teacher to be creative, and it's like, wow.
Yeah. And consistency is definitely key. I'm sorry, I can't find anything, but I'm really trying here because I brought all my stuff home. Let me just go get one of my textbooks and then we'll talk about it. Oh, like this is actually a really good one. We did when we were learning about function tables, we did the algebra walk. Have you guys ever done that? So that was really cool. That was one of the core problems that, like I said, was really kind of when I started coming around to it, is we had these students, like we put these big graphs up all over the room, and they were given in their teams, they were given like a table. They had to try and find the rule. And this was when we started introducing like like unit rates and proportionality to them. And they then would put the dots on the board, and then we had them walk in the halls and try and like plot themselves. And so they were like graphing themselves, and that was one of like the productive struggles, like because the kids may have not gotten it right, but then when they were able to visualize it, like it just kind of helped them like conceptualize it. So I thought it was really cool. I don't know, just something worth talking about, I guess, since we are killing some time. But yeah, I really like it. I don't know, like I said, it's difficult and challenging and also very wordy, but it does provide a lot of, like, this is a good example of a core problem too. They were given like a graph like this, and in their teams they had to like make a story up about the graph, so like they had to talk, and that was just like one of the core problems, the things that they were able to do together. So it's definitely different than like the traditional math curriculum, at least, and how I was taught things, but I see the benefit to it. Well, that's pretty much it for the chapter. It just talks about then the summary and the 7 principles of intensive instruction goes before that: ongoing progress monitoring, drill and practice, which I'm surprised it says that, because I feel like no one talks about drill and practice anymore. You're not really, like, at least in my district, we are not really supposed to do it. Instructional explicitness, instructional design to minimize learning challenge. So that also goes against what our curriculum is currently teaching. So I don't know. Cumulative review, systematic motivation to promote self-regulation and encourage students to work hard, and then having the conceptual foundation. So just in summary, students can struggle with math. It creates, I feel like in some ways more than reading, because it combines reading and it combines all these abstract thinking processes that students with HI could really struggle with. But that's all I got. I don't know if you guys wanted anything else to add. We're a little under the time, but I think it'll be okay.
I agree.
Okay. Zane's like, I had 2 hours of parent-teacher conferences. I am done.
Yeah, I'm I'm beat. That's all right though.
Well, thank you for meeting us. Other than that, I know we have another one coming up, and I want to say that Professor Oberle's coming. So just so you guys know, and you have that all on your radar.